I was afraid they'd kill me. Thus far, there was nothing official about my detention. They hadn't shown me a warrant, nor had I been taken to a police station. I feared the police could murder me and pretend I'd been killed in an encounter. I'd read about many situations in which the police claimed to have no options but to open fire when suspects were attempting to resist their arrest. At midnight, 11 hours after I had been detained, I was taken to a police station and informed I had been arrested under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 2004, which applies to people the state brands as terrorists. I spent that night in a damp cell in the station house.
I woke in the dark. Everything I owned fit into 2 plastic garbage bags in the corner of my cell. When are these folks gonna let you out? My mom used to ask me. Today, Mama. I thought.
Getting to the Shargia cells, I was warmly greeted by political prisoners who knew me or about me, saying, Himdallalak bisalama ya salam. Among them was a famous lawyer, a professor of philosophy at the University of Khartoum, a number of well-known politicians, a media expert from our ministry, and many others from different walks of life and professions. At first I thought that lot must have gone mad or something to congratulate me on such a miserable day in my life. It took me time to understand what they really meant. 2 days I spent there with no toothbrush, no change of clothes, no bed, and no nothing. I had to sleep, if I could, on the dirt. As for the food, I had none. I had to share the inedible stuff other fellow prisoners were given, as no food rations were allotted for unprocessed newcomers. Going without food wasn't as difficult as I imagined. One has to fight the urge to eat only for the first couple of days. After that, the mind and body start getting accustomed to the absence of food, and the initial fierce pangs of hunger died out. However, memories of taste would still haunt me. Within the first 2 weeks, my weight started dropping as my body started eating itself.
They wanted me to disclose the location of a cache of arms and explosives, or information about my supposed links with the Maoists. To make me more amenable to their demands, they stretched out my body completely, using an updated version of the medieval torture technique of drawing. But there was no quartering. My arms were tied to a window grill high above the ground, while 2 policemen stood on my outstretched thighs to keep me pinned to the floor. This was calculated to cause maximum pain without leaving visible injuries. Despite these precautions, my ears started to bleed and my jaws began to swell.
I am in cell 16 in a detention block enclosing 18 other political prisoners. Here, I have no name. I am just a number in a file, K677. A tiny iron frame against one wall serves as a bed and a tiny board against another wall serves as a desk. These fill up the minute cell. Privacy, for instance. I mean, it's brutal invasion. Thus, I was daily trailed by a warder for 24 hours in waking and sleeping. It was unnerving, truly unnerving, to find a warder watching me shit and urinate into a children's chamber pot in my cell, or to find him standing by the entrance of the toilet to watch me do the same exercise. The electric light is on all night long. To induce sleep, I had to tie a towel over my eyes. This ended in straining them so that after a month, they started smarting and watering. But even more painful than that was to suddenly wake up in the middle of the night from a dreamless slumber or one softened by sweet illusion or riddled with nightmares, to find two bodiless eyes fixed on me through the iron bars.
Queues for water in the morning, queues to wash your clothes, queues to cut your hair and nails, queues for the toilet, queues for tea, breakfast, lunch and dinner, queues for the canteen, queues to meet your family or lawyer, queues for treatment, queues for your court dates, queues for justice, longest queues for smallest things.
Paper, any paper, is about the most precious article for a political prisoner. More so for one like me, who was in political detention because of his writing. For the urge to write, picking the jagged bits embedded in my mind, partly to wrench some ease from my own mind, and partly that some word, sometime, may know, is almost irresistible to a political prisoner.
Queues for tea, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Queues for the canteen.
Queues for water in the morning,
Queues to wash your clothes. Queues to cut your hair and nails. Queues for the toilet. Queues for tea, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Queues for the canteen. Queues to meet your family or lawyer. Queues for treatment. Queues for your court dates. Queues for justice.
longest queues for smallest things.
The struggle to write is a struggle to remain sane. I have found that toilet paper is the most excellent medium for a novelist. It is thin, it is plentiful, and it is easily hidden. I write in the early morning before the chaining ritual begins. They come to check the bars, to check the locks, to check the spirits. They want to see if the metal has entered the soul, but they do not look at the toilet rolls. In these rolls, I am free.
The security guards and all of the ranking officers at Angola were white. And we called them free men. As soon as I arrived at the registration center, I heard prisoners talk about Fresh Fish Day, the day first-time prisoners were taken from the registration into the prison population. It was also the day sexual predators lined up and looked for their next victims. Sexual slavery was the culture at Angola. I saw men being raped at the registration center. Free men didn't do anything to stop it. They wanted prisoners who had no spirit. They wanted prisoners to fear one another and abuse one another because it made them easier to control. If you were raped at Angola, or what was called turned out, your life in prison was virtually over. You became a gal boy, a possession of your rapist. You would be sold, pimped, used, and abused by your rapist, and even some guards. Your only way out was to kill yourself or kill your rapist. If you killed your rapist, you'd be free of human bondage within the confines of the prison forever. But in exchange, you would most likely be convicted of murder. You would most likely be convicted of murder.
Nurse, will you send up the first patient?
Many times I've offered to go first because I like to remind myself that by the time I'm awake, so brief is the period of unconsciousness, most of the group will still be waiting in a daze of anxiety, which sometimes confuses them into thinking that perhaps they've had treatment, perhaps it has been sneaked upon them without their being aware of it. The people behind the screen begin to moan and cry. We are taken strictly according to volts. We wait while the ward 2 people are done. We know the rumors attached to ECT. It is training for Sing Sing when we are at last convicted of murder and sentenced to death and sit strapped in the electric chair with the electrodes, touching our skin through slits in our clothing. Our hair is singed as we die, and the last smell in our nostrils is the smell of ourselves burning. And the fear leads some patient to more madness.
When we were out on our hour, we were sometimes allowed to sit on the floor in front of the cell of another prisoner and play dominoes or cards, depending, of course, on which tier sergeant was on duty. I sometimes played chess, dominoes, or checkers with the man in the next cell. The game would be laid out on the floor between us. Since there obviously wasn't much freedom of movement, we'd use a pencil to push our piece into place as needed. We all came up with outlaw rules for dominoes to make games more challenging. Now, trash talking, you see, was a big part of any game. Trying to psych your opponent out, break his concentration. If a guy's game was garbage, we told him he had to stand in the garbage can.
Narya was a prisoner in Taloja Central Jail, Navi Mumbai. He was young and had already spent a few years in jail. He was an eccentric who would roam the prison yard with complete disregard. Once he hit a jail superintendent on his face, after which the jailers mercilessly tortured him by resorting to nalbandi, where the prisoner is made to lie flat on the floor with his feet hooked to the iron bars of the prison. His soles are then relentlessly beaten with a baton. He was declared mentally unwell, and pumped with mental injections. He was thrown into solitary confinement. The careless pumping of medication into his body and the solitary confinement took its toll on his state of mind, deteriorating it further. He was afflicted with tuberculosis and was admitted to the prison hospital. Narya ended his days in this pitiable state as a mental health patient in the prison hospital in 2024.
But living in concrete, you get used to the noise. Sound bounces off the floors and walls and echoes. When someone on the tier cracked, you'd hear him cry or scream. Some guys would sometimes moan for hours or days. Televisions were always on and the volume was high. You heard every voice yelling up and down the tier. 16 times a day, someone's door would be open, then an hour later closed. Then you'd hear the chain between the prisoner's feet as he walked out and when he returned. Prisoners on different tiers would talk to each other through the pipe chase, and everybody heard those conversations all day. Security had listening devices in the pipe chase. I never heard conversations in the pipe chase. For that specific reason. Everybody could hear what you were saying.
There is an aspect of madness which is seldom mentioned in fiction because it would damage the romantic popular idea of the insane as a person whose speech appeals as immediately poetic. Few of the people who roamed the day room would have qualified as acceptable heroines. The masks provoked mostly irritation, hostility, and impatience. Their behavior affronted, caused uneasiness. They wept and moaned, they quarreled and complained. They were a nuisance and were treated as such. It was forgotten that they too possessed a prized humanity which needed care and love.
After about a month in extreme solitude, I was sitting on my bunk when I started sweating. And the walls of my cell started to move toward me at the same time. My clothes tightened around my body. I took off my shirt and pants, but still felt like I was being squeezed, strangled. The ceiling was pressing down on me. It was hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to see. I forced myself to stand. I took a few steps, trying not to fall. At the end of my cell, I turned and walked back to the cell door. I turned and continued, pacing back and forth for several minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually, I was so tired I lay on the bunk and fell asleep. After the first couple of times this happened, I started recognizing when it was coming on. My clothes tightened and I started to sweat. The atmosphere pressed down on me. Sometimes it lasted 5 or 10 minutes. Other times it lasted for hours. The only thing that helped was to pace back and forth for several minutes. Usually it didn't end until I was so exhausted from walking back and forth that I could lie down. I continued having episodes like this one, which I later learned was claustrophobia. The whole time I was in prison. For about 3 years, I slept sitting up, propped up against the wall. And I started to sweat, just believing it helped prevent claustrophobic attacks. It seemed to lessen them for hours. But they never stopped.
The monotony. The human mind revolts against endless sameness. In ordinary social life, even the closest knit family hardly ever spends a whole day together in meaningless circles in their compound. Man, woman, and child go about their different activities and different places, and they only meet in the evening to recount their different experiences. Experiments done on animals show that when they are confined to a small space and subjected to the same routine, they end up tearing each other. Now the Kanu government was doing the same experiment on human beings.
But the ripple of humanity may take the forms of protest, depression, exhilaration, violence. It is easier to stun the beautiful fish with a dose of electricity than to handle it with care and transfer it to a pool where it will thrive.
Capitulation, betrayal, and resistance. The passion that united us. Some circumstances reveal a person's true nature more clearly than others. In some situations, you can no longer hide who you really are.
When I came out of jail, I felt like I was moving from one prison to another. While we are in jail, the police are constantly around us. This time, the police were not there. That is the small change. And there was a sense of calmness, knowing that no one was following me. But this does not mean that we are completely free.
I looked away from them and tried not to think of them and repeated to myself what one of the nurses had told me. When you leave the hospital, you must forget all you have ever seen. Put it out of your minds completely, as if it never happened, and go live a normal life in the outside world. And by what I have written in this document, you will see, won't you, that I have obeyed her?
For 44 years, I defied the state of Louisiana and the Department of Corrections. Their main objective was to break my spirit. They did not break me.
We know that today all citizens of India are under so-called surveillance. We are all living under this surveillance. So, sure, we have come out of jail, but this is a bigger prison, which is open. If you want to call this freedom, that's your choice.
I have witnessed the horrors of man's cruelty to man. But I did not lose my humanity. I bear the scars of beatings, loneliness, isolation, and persecution. I'm also marked by every kindness.